Welcome to the Lessons from Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Brian Beckcom. My next guest is Dr. Carleah East, also known as the Sapphire Woman. Dr. East is the founder and CEO of Smile Psychology and Associates in Florida. She's the founder and the CEO of the Sapphire Women's Organization. She also holds degrees in psychology, sociology. She has a master's arts degree in mental health counseling and a PhD in general psychology. Dr. East is a clinical psychotherapist, a licensed mental health counselor, a psychology professor, and the author of The Hangover, Overcoming Emotional Addiction, 12 Steps to Emotional Sobriety, which, by the way, is a great book I've read. It's a very direct outline, basically, of how to define and then overcome emotional addiction. Dr. East also has a column that she writes on a regular basis, a newsletter, and she's married and has a 5-year-old son. In the podcast, Dr. East and I talk about mental health, especially during these times we live in right now with the pandemic and the protest and all the other things going on. We talk about things that people can do specifically to improve their mental health, some of which involves things that may surprise you, like diet and things of that nature. We talk about the protest and how people of different races can come together and work together to try to work through some of the issues we're having right now. Dr. East is a really engaging guest with an absolutely beautiful 10 out of 10 smile. I had a great time talking to her. We ended up talking for an hour and a half and could have talked for another hour. It was so interesting. I think you'll really enjoy this, particularly if you're interested in mental health issues. And Dr. East is just a wonderful woman. So in any event, now I give you Dr. Carleah East. Hey, everybody, Brian Beckcom at VB Attorneys. I've got Dr. Carleah East, and I've just introduced Dr. East to all of you. Dr. East, how are you doing today?
I am doing very well, focusing on the things that I can be gracious for and appreciative of, without ignoring what's going on, but I'm trying to focus on the positive too. So thank you so much for having me today.
For sure. And, did they train you when you go to school to be a clinical psychologist to have such a great smile? I mean, just, I'm looking at you right now and I'm thinking, man, you're making me happy just looking at you. So is that part of your training?
I don't think it's part of our training, but in all honesty, I think that one of the things that we have to do as clinicians is remember to find the happiness and the joy and remember to smile. Sure. People are often coming to us with some heavy, subject matter that they want to deal with and discuss. And they've already heard the negativity, right? They've already heard the lack of hope from people in their communities or from friends or family. And, with me, with my company, Smile, that's an acronym for Solving and Managing Issues with Love and Enrichment. And I use that acronym specifically because people forget that therapy is a wonderful process to help us learn how to smile genuinely again. Yeah. Not just put on that happy face when we're in front of coworkers or we're in front of our mates even, or we're in front of our friends because we don't want to seem weak, but it's about genuinely learning how to smile by recognizing your issues and knowing that you can work through them with love. And I have to be the face, representation of that. And I'm just built genuinely excited and genuinely positive.
You have a beautiful smile, a beautiful
Thank you.
smile. So, and many years ago I did, I don't know if you've ever heard of a float tank or a sensory deprivation tank. It's basically this, but where you get in this tank and it's pitch black and the water is the same temperature as your body. There's no sound. And so you don't get any sense at all. And so what I was doing is meditating in there. And one thing I realized, and this was probably 3 or 4 years ago, is I was walking around with a frown on my face all the time. And I didn't even think about it. And then I started looking around, doctor, and I was like, man, there's a lot of people walking around with frowns on their face. So I actually made myself a reminder on my phone. It pops up every morning, and all it says is smile. And it's funny because I found that when I smile, it not only makes me happier, but like everybody around me seems to, it's like it's infectious, right? So anyway, doctor, yeah. So anyway, well, it's great to see such a friendly face, and I want to Thank you very, very much for coming on the podcast today. I think the timing of
Mhm.
what your expertise is and what we're going to talk about hopefully today could not be more perfect. But before we get into that, I got to ask you, you're married and you have a son. How's your family doing during quarantine and all this other stuff going on?
Thank you for asking. Yes, I have a husband and a son, 5-year-old kiddo. And you know what? He's doing a great job. One of the reasons why I think he's doing a great job is because we talk to him, in very
Yeah,
real terms about what's going on.
yeah,
There is no fantasy fairy as to why we're not in school, or you know what I mean, as to
yeah.
why we're quarantining. There's a pandemic going on, so he's doing well. We're keeping things balanced. We are blessed to have a pretty nice sized backyard, so we do a lot of outside activities. We have recess,
Yeah.
adult recess as
Adult
well as
recess.
necessary.
Yeah.
Time out for mommy, time out for dad. Yeah. um,
Exactly.
but we just try to keep a balance and allow him to have his gadgets, because we know kids they want to have their gadget, they want to have their roadblocks, and so we allow time and space for that, but we also just make sure we're breaking bread together, having conversations, and still allowing him to be a kid, do kid stuff.
I was talking to a Methodist preacher a couple of weeks ago for the podcast. We were talking about having kids during the pandemic, and he said,
Mhm.
"Yeah, my wife said if I caught her talking to herself, she was just having a parent teacher conference." so,
Serious.
but it is interesting. I have three kids. I have two boys, 16 and 14, and a daughter who's 12, and
Okay.
it actually has been it's been good for me and my wife, I think, to get to spend a lot of time with our children. So I know
Right.
these times are terrible, but if we look at the silver lining,
Hmm.
we all get to spend maybe too much time with our kids, but that's been good too. So, Dr. East, you're in Florida and you are a
Hmm.
clinical psychologist. And a lot of people,
Psychotherapist.
a therapist, yeah, and a
Hmm.
lot of people in your area know who you are. You've written a book. You've got a great practice, a big practice, by the way. And but for the people who don't know
Hmm.
who you are, tell us a little bit about where you're from, where you grew up, where you went to school, what you do now, things like that.
Okay. Well, born and raised right here in St. Petersburg, Florida. And so been here all my life, 40 years now. So yes, I am the 4-0. I
No
embrace it.
way. No
I
way.
look good, right? I
Yeah,
think
you
I'm
do.
okay for 40.
Yeah.
I come from good stock, good
Yeah, there you
DNA.
go.
But yeah, born and raised, and went to University of Central Florida for my bachelor's degree, and then ventured to Argosy University for my master's, and then finally ended my studies with Capella University for my PhD. And I'm blessed enough to come from a family of educators, community, activists. My dad, worked in Sarasota County for 30 years over Parks and Recreation. My mom was a college professor for 30 years. And so I really come from good stock, which has been great in helping me kind of maintain a balance and understand the importance of giving back to my community. But it has always been a calling for me to be a therapist. Actually, you know what? I wanted to be a lawyer. That
Really?
was my first dream, yes, to be a lawyer. And my reasoning is I wanted to be able to defend, those that were innocent and
Yeah.
persecute those that were guilty. And after doing a little bit of research, I realized that I might not always get that hand dealt
Yeah.
to me in that way.
For
And
sure.
I knew I was the type of person that I wouldn't be built to defend someone that I knew was guilty. That would be hard for me. So I was like, okay, well, what is it that I can do that sets me on the path? And I realized that I had the gift of gab. I had the gift of understanding, putting things into basic terms so that anyone can understand, and seeing past judgment. I wasn't given that thing. My blessings did not include passing judgment on folk for their lifestyle or for the cards that they've been dealt. And so I knew probably in middle school that I wanted to be a therapist. And that's what I focused on, and, went to school until I finished. And I ended up opening a practice called SMILE, which, as I stated before, is an acronym for Solving and Managing Issues with Love and Enrichment. And I started out with just a small office of me and 100 square feet. And now I have a suite of 5 offices. and several individuals that work with me as my team. And so I'm very proud to not only be a person of color in this position, because that's a rarity in itself. I mean, United States percentages put me like in 23% maybe in the total US population. So I'm proud to be able to provide these services, but also I'm even more proud of having such an eclectic group of individuals that work for me. Black, white, multi, verse with their language. We cover substance and addiction issues. We cover children's autism, those types of areas. But of course, women's issues, and your basic mental health issues that we know people deal with on a regular basis, your anxiety, depression, mood disorder, stuff like that. So we really try to cover the gamut, and we pride ourselves in specializing in a holistic way of treating individuals, meaning it's not just about talk therapy. That's important too, but it's about what are you eating that's playing a role in the way that you feel? What vitamins are you not putting in your body? What kind of stretching or coping strategies are you putting into play? So we really want to focus on those areas, because when we're dealing with topics such as domestic violence, when we're dealing with topics such as LGBTQIA, we want to make sure that we are covering that person from top to bottom. And so, our goal is to never let a person leave our office without a smile on their face, because that smile resembles hope. And that's what we inspire to give.
You said a lot there, and I got to tell you, Doctor, I'm absolutely and completely fascinated by this topic, particularly the topic of psychology, addiction, the way your mind works. And I've been fascinated, frankly, about it for, probably 7 or 8 years, because, when I was young, I'm 47 now, but when I was in my 20s and 30s, I thought PTSD, I thought psychology, I thought all that stuff was a bunch of woo-woo, just people talking. It just toughen up was my attitude. And then I had an experience with panic attacks, and I got to tell you, after that, I found meditation. I found some other things, were yoga, and some other things that were very, very helpful for me personally. But it made me realize not only are these psychological issues real, but they, in my opinion, are in many ways more important than the physical issues we assess. Like your mental state is that is basically how you experience the world. It's with you all the time, and if you're not working on your mental state, then you're not going to have a very happy life. And so I'm super fascinated to hear from you, because this really is, directly in your expertise, the idea of mental health and treating people with all different sorts of issues. So let me ask you this before we get into the meat of this. What was it that made you interested in this? Like, why did you? I became a lawyer, for instance, primarily because my mother died when I was 10 of some really bad negligence, and I think subconsciously that kind of drove me towards what you were talking about. I wanted to help people and families in that situation. But what was it that, for you personally, that said, I want to devote my life essentially to helping other people deal with their mental issues?
I think that for me, I honestly got pretty tired of hearing people say it's in your head.
Yeah.
And my response, began to be, yeah, duh, you're right. That's
the point, right? That's exactly the point. Yeah.
That's where it is.
Yeah.
I think for me, the excitement is not just helping the client that's in front of me, but the reason why I have a platform specifically, because I could just do therapy, right? I could just do therapy with my client and that be it. But the reason why I have this platform is because it's about the individuals who are not quite ready to address the fact that they're having some difficulties, or they have family members that they don't quite understand how to navigate, how to communicate, how to effectively, support and be there for them. So it's kind of like a 50-50 between the two of them. And I genuinely feel that every person on this planet deserves to live their lives to the fullest and be happy and satisfied with that life. Not compromise that life, not settle for that life, but genuinely be happy, about where their life lies. And we all have accommodations. Those of us that have high blood pressure, we take our high blood pressure medication to help balance that off. Those of us that, may have some form of physical disability, we put accommodations in place for that situation to be taken care of. But I found a discrepancy and a huge error in the lack of accommodations for mental health and the lack of understanding. And what I also found is that repetitively, we see a kind of a light flicker in the concept of education, and then that light goes out. So we'll have someone in the professional realm of sports or acting or something come out and say, oh, I'm bipolar, or I have depression, or I deal with this. And then we rally the circles around, and we rally these wagons, and we start supporting, and then that falls off. And when you made that point about mental health having more of an impact than sometimes some of our physical medical diagnoses, you're absolutely correct on that. If I have an injury on my ankle, which is causing me pain or causing me difficulty to walk around, and my mindset is one of defeat, if my mindset is one that I feel defeated, that I feel no motivation, that I don't feel supported, then where is that internal drive, which is only found internally, or energy or motivation to push and pull me to go to my rehab, to get dressed in the morning, to look at that scar on my ankle and see it as a beautiful thing, as a challenge instead of a struggle.
Yeah.
That's the mental part. And so my job is to come in kind of like a surgeon, but through my words and through me pointing out your words and areas, get you to think differently. That's a powerful thing to do, is to get someone's thought process to change to where they
Is there anything
recognize,
more powerful than that? I'm not sure there's anything more powerful than that.
Yeah, to get us to change the way we perceive things, or the way we see ourselves, or to make
Doctor,
choices.
it's not just like on an individual level, it's on a societal level too. Like we see this right now.
Absolutely.
Like people are reframing the way they look at certain very important things, both on a societal level and an individual level. And I'm not sure anybody could give me an example of anything that's more powerful than the power of ideas and the power of how you look at the world. And you said something earlier, I think you were, tell me if I'm guessing right, I think you were referring to DeMar DeRozan and Kevin Love when you talked about professional athletes raising the issue, and then all of a sudden it kind of goes away.
Well, there's been there's been them and many others, that we've seen. And the problem is that we light these torches, and then the flame flickers out, and we don't continue to move forward. What I tell people is this: if your car starts to sputter or make any noise, or the check engine light comes on, immediately, if we have the means, right, we're like, we need to get this thing fixed. Because why? Our car is our means of transportation. Some of us see that as our means to make money, because it gets us from our jobs to our homes to whatever we do in order so that we can provide for our families. So if you would take the same urgency to get your car a tune-up and choose to get yourself a mental health tune-up.
Yeah.
And this vehicle is the thing, this brain is the thing that carries us from day to day, decision to decision, from breath to breath, right? Your brain decides that from breath to breath. Then I think we will start recognizing the power of reaching out and getting some help and some understanding.
And for some people, Dr. East, and I include myself in this group until having a personal experience with some mental health issues, specifically panic attacks. I think some people still, so Kevin Love and DeMar DeRozan are NBA players, for people that aren't familiar with this story. And essentially DeMar DeRozan came out first and said, I've had problems with depression and anxiety. And Kevin Love came out and said, me too. And I've had those problems too. And at the time, I was thinking, man, that is really brave, because particularly in that culture, that macho athletic culture, talking about these issues, at least historically, has made particularly men feel like maybe they're not up to the task or something. So for instance, Dr. East, and you'll probably know exactly what I'm talking about when I tell you what I'm about to tell you. When I started having panic attacks, I didn't go to the doctor, like a complete stupid idiot man. Like I'm going to grit my teeth and I'm going to get through this. And so, and it took about a year of trying to figure out various things until I finally got that problem solved. But I could have gone to somebody like you immediately, and within a couple of weeks, that you would have been able to teach me what was going on and how to fix it. So what do you tell people that are hesitant to either admit that they may be struggling mentally with some issues, or people that know they're struggling, but they're hesitant to come to somebody like you? Like, what would you tell them about that?
I often like to use the the example of a personal trainer, right? And so, you know, a lot of us like to go to the gym, work out. We've had some level of interaction with a personal trainer or someone, right, that tries to guide us on how to healthy eat. You come to a therapist because we are your personal trainers for your minds.
Yeah.
We teach you how to use your brain, which is a very large organism that helps to regulate your whole body. We teach you how to use that brain to the best ability so that it can fire and act appropriately, so that it can heal the way you need to heal. And so number one, I try to use it as an example of just like anything you're training for, you have to get exposed to a professional in that area to teach you how to maybe work past those things that you are weak at. You know, if you're first time learning how to train, you may not be able to lift 250 pounds out the gate.
Yeah.
You know, you may be only a 100-pounder, but that trainer is going to teach you ways of building your resistance, your resiliency, so that you can push towards that 250. Our job as therapists is to teach you how to handle these mental drainings, these dementors that are in our communities that just kind of want to suck all the energy out of us and help us how to balance that. The other piece that I try to inspire to focus, especially men, if we want to really talk about that, is the fact that there is this societal umbrella that says that a man has to be strong, and there's this very stereotypical, you know, look of what that man looks like and what strength is. There's this machismo, right, that men, no matter your culture, are put up against. If the idea is really to be strong for your family, strong for your community, strong for your environment, why would you allow something to implant itself, fester, grow, and then interfere with other areas of your life? Because that's what mental disparity does. That's what mental interruptions do. They interrupt our ability to feel positive about ourselves, to feel motivated, to love the way we want to live the way we want to, and to laugh the way we want to. So if it's really about strength, we have to recognize that we're not going to allow anything to come in and jeopardize that strength. And the strength is saying, you know what, this is an area I need to hustle up on. I need to get my mental health to 250 instead of 100. I need to get pushing. And, you know, really just making it into human layman's terms that I feel people can understand. And then the third piece, if I may add, is your therapist got to be right. You know, the therapist that you go to see, you've got to vibe with that person. You have to feel comfortable with he or her, and you have to feel like they get you. And so it's important, just like when we're picking a medical doctor to do surgery on us, we go through the gamut. We check their licenses, we check, you know, we want to know what work they've done. It's the same thing with the therapist, finding one that works for you. We don't all fit.
Yeah.
Right? We don't all fit. So be open to that experience of talking to someone maybe for your first session and being like, oh, I didn't really vibe with him or her. Find somebody else, you know?
Man, that reminds me of this story. This is like 20 years ago. I used to dip Copenhagen, and I've quit. I haven't had a dip of Copenhagen in about 4 years now, but I wanted to quit tobacco. So I go to this hypnotist, and I show up to this dark office, and I'm about to get hypnotized, and I see he's got some sort of pendant, and he walks out of the room to do something, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I think that might be a devil symbol. I'm about to get hypnotized by this guy. So I like immediately just ran out of the office, and I never came back. But you know, you said something that I think I really want people to hear this. I want to emphasize this a little bit. At the beginning of what you just said, you talked about mental training, and you compared it to physical training. And what it took me a long time to realize, doctor, is just like you said, if you put garbage into your body, if you don't use your body the way it's supposed to be used, if you don't exercise your body, you're going to be very physically unhealthy. That's just guaranteed.
Right.
And so why would it be any different for your mind? Why would it be any different if you put a bunch of garbage in your mind and you don't work on your mind? Why would you expect your mind to be anything but very unhealthy? And it took me a very long time to realize that, doctor. And it also took me a while to realize that what you do and what people like you do is you're just exactly what you said. I think it's a great way to put it. You are a physical trainer for the mind. You teach people how their minds work. And so I think that's a fantastic analogy. And you know, the other thing, doctor, and I want you to comment on this a little bit. My impression has been, and maybe it's my own biases, but my impression has been over the last 5 or 6, maybe 10 years, that we have kind of awoken to the fact that mental health is as important or more important than physical health. Maybe it's the veterans that are
Right.
coming back with PTSD. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's some of the stuff we've been going through as a society. Maybe it's some of the social
Mm-hmm.
media and how it affects our brains. But my impression is people are starting to realize kind of globally how important it is, what you do, how important that is. So do
Yes.
you see that maybe the people are starting to recognize this a little bit more?
I definitely see a trend of people understanding the importance of mental health and mental wellness, just globally around. I would be remiss if I didn't state that, dealing with the pandemic of the COVID-19, that did help to shed some light on this situation, because all the distractions that we would normally use to
Yeah.
work through some of these situations, we didn't have, because we were kind of socially quarantining ourselves.
Yeah.
And so distractions of projects and people and going places and spending money and drinking and doing all these unhealthy ways that we overindulge in. Not that you can't indulge in them, but we overindulge them and we use them as ways of coping. We've been forced to deal with our own stuff, and so I do see people definitely understanding the importance of mental health. But what I also think people are finally getting is how the mental health impacts your behaviors, your actions, and how those compound traumas that we are all right now kind of experiencing, right?
Yeah.
These multiple traumas being added on. So first we were already and when I say we, I mean folks that are like-minded like me, right?
Yeah.
First there was always the trauma of where is our country going, what is happening, with our democracy, with our whole government, like what is happening. So there were fears and little microaggressions and traumas that were happening there. Then you have coronavirus come in, and now there's an additional trauma, because now freedoms that we once had, ability to move about that we once had, those things were kind of taken from us. So many of us that had all of these, I would say, opportunities and access to things, we're now put in the position that other people have already been living in, which is lack of access and resources and ability to move about. So that adds another bit of trauma,
Sure.
okay? Because you're
Yeah.
forced to deal with your stuff. And then when we add the next level of trauma, which is the in your face of racial disparities that are taking place, we can't help but recognize how that is just heavy on people's mind emotionally and mentally. And so I have seen an increase in mental health, even on shows like CNN, right? Who's very good. I love CNN. And they cover these great stories. Now they're having more town halls about mental health. You see more mental health apps that are popping up, around. And so I think it's important for people to recognize that sometimes life is just heavy,
Yeah.
and we need a non-biased viewpoint to just point us in the right direction. You don't have to have a mental illness or be diagnosed with, a mental disparity in order for you to reach out for some healing
Yeah.
and some guidance for someone. It doesn't have to be about you withering. You could be reaching out because you want to help understand your friend or your coworker, or you want to help understand as a white person how to help Black people's voices be heard, or you want to understand as a parent how not to flip out while you're being a teacher and a parent.
Yeah.
These are things that we need help navigating, and that's what mental wellness is about.
And it's not something that, and again, this is something that took me a very long time to realize, but it's not something that happens naturally necessarily. I mean, it does take
Right,
some
right.
training. And,
Mm-hmm.
you talked about the quarantine, you talk about the protest,
Mm-hmm.
and then you put on top of that this essentially science experiment called social media that none of us signed up for, really. And
Right.
they exploit, I mean, the social media companies, and I'm sure you know that, Dr. E, some of our listeners may not, but they employ an army of psychologists in order to figure out better ways to
Right.
manipulate people, to get more clicks, more links, get people on
Right.
social media. And that's fine, I suppose, except none of us signed up for this.
Right.
Like we're just letting Twitter and Facebook and all these companies run psychological experiments on people, essentially without their consent. And so when you combine all the stuff you and I are talking about,
Mm-hmm.
it's a recipe um, for an unhealthy mental state of mind. So
Yeah.
let's get into the current times now, and maybe
Okay.
you can, because one of the reasons I was super excited that you were coming on the podcast was to talk about what people can do. I mean, quarantine, pandemic,
Right.
racial strife and protest, police brutality. I mean, none of us were prepared for this earlier in the year. So give us some general ideas of, what you would tell people about how to cope
Hmm.
with these things that are just completely and totally unpredictable.
Right. So first of all, I think that we have to, number one, recognize on both sides of the gamut. As an African American, I have to recognize my worth and value so that I know what it is I'm fighting for. What those disparities are that I'm fighting against. As a non-person of color, I need to be aware of my privilege, of the access that I've had to services or goods or just those types of things. Both of those sides, being aware of those areas, help us to hone in on what is upsetting us and how we can best utilize our voices, our strengths to kind of fight against that. And so I've been asked this question a lot, like, how do we navigate,
Yeah.
Everything that's going on without becoming the thing that we're fighting against? Because it's such an emotional pull and we were already pulled emotionally before, it's very easy for us to get frustrated, angry, and aggressive. So again, know your worth, know your privilege, put those things into perspective. The next thing is that we got to know how we feel and understand why others feel that way. So from my perspective, it's important for me to understand how I feel as a person of color, how this is impacting me, what are my fears about this? Because again, acknowledging my fears is a strength because then I know what I need to work on.
Yeah.
I know what areas I need to build my strengths up. Now, for the other half of our society, it's really about understanding those biases and understanding the fears that we're having. So it's not about feeling sorry or feeling sympathy for anyone. It's about empathy. And I just want to explain that for some people who kind of get like, okay, well, what's really the difference between the two? Sympathy is feeling sorrowful for someone, for their situation. I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm sorry you went through that. Empathy is saying, I'm going to put myself in your shoes and actually imagine how it must feel for you to go through that experience. And so it's important that we understand the empathic part because it's about being able to put yourselves in the shoes of a person and say, now I get why they're pissed.
Yeah.
Now I get why they're frustrated or angry or sad, or depressed. So there's those pieces. Now, when I bring it all together generally, we've got to ask questions. We have to ask difficult questions, and we cannot be afraid to share those answers and to share the ignorances that we may have. Every single person on this planet is born with biases and prejudicial views. Not that your parent indoctrinated this in you, but society, television shows, commercial channels, right? Networks are geared towards certain clusters and groups of people. And so when you watch those networks, you're going to automatically get those subliminal messages that talk about, that put those ideas in our heads. So we have to be aware that we are not, no one's guilty for creating this. We're guilty if we're not helping to move it, to push the needle, right? We're guilty if we're not using our voices. So how do we do that? How do we use our voices? First of all, use it in a way that's comfortable for you, okay? I am very concerned about COVID-19. I am very concerned about also my child being an African-American boy who's going to grow up to be an African-American man. But with that said, what I've got to make sure is that I use my platform in the way that makes me feel safe, keeps my family safe, but also allows me to speak my truth. So I make sure that I'm reaching, I do my 5 tips every week so that I give inspiration to folks. I'm sharing positive outcomes of the protests. Positive. We know the negative. I'm not ignoring it, but I'm choosing, right, to share and tweet about the positive things, or sharing tweet about resources, or sharing tweet about organizations that are making moves in our communities. Those are ways that we can all use our platforms, or we can use our social media pages to strategically have a voice, even if it's one of just positive memes and inspiration. even if it's one of you just sharing the fact of two people hugging each other. It doesn't matter. We have to use those. And then the next thing that we have to do is start asking questions. Asking questions at our workplaces, asking questions at our churches, at our community organizations. Where are you, where are you, International Baccalaureate program on making sure that we are having equality for all people? Where are you, middle school or high school? Where are you, Johnson and Johnson? We have to ask these questions of the places that we patronize, as well as the places that we are employed, to make sure that they are aware, that we are aware that some changes need to take place for inclusivity of all people. And those are just some very generic things, but those are very powerful things, because those are groundbreaking, right, things that we can do to start the conversation. Think about cancer. When cancer first was, diagnosed and a name was put to it, no one talked about it. Don't talk about cancer. Don't want people to know you have cancer. It was this big secret thing.
It was like it was contagious or something, right? Yeah.
Right. And now what do you have? You can't Google cancer without finding a walk, a march, a protest, a fundraiser, save the tatas, something going on every single month, right? And that's because we talked about it. We had dialogue, and we find ways to celebrate, and we found ways to encourage people, and we found people who survived cancer to show folks that they can get through it. And so it's that same thought process and manifestation of ideas and works that we have to do when we're dealing with mental health. We have to find people who are in it, not just famous people, but folk we see across the street, folk we see as CEOs of our organizations and our corporations, to talk about this. We have to give it a face of familiarity, and we have to continue to raise awareness about it and not stop, because once you stop, you become stagnant.
Yeah, and you said something earlier about interacting in a positive way, and I'll tell you, last night the NFL protest has been a big deal to me for a very long time, because and I think it's because I have a Black older brother. I was a basketball player in high school and college. I spent a lot of time around Black men, particularly very big Black men, and so I feel like personally invested in this, and so I've been posting stuff on social media for many years about how we have forgotten about the historical fact that our country was founded on protest. This is part of the fabric of our country, and it's been really frustrating to me because, Doctor, the people that don't agree with the kneeling typically say something about the military and the flag, and it's like I'm banging my head against the wall. I mean, my father, my mother, both my grandfathers, two of my uncles, and hundreds of my friends were in the military. Don't tell me about the military. That's what I feel like saying. I know more about the military than you. I've forgotten more about the military than most of you will ever know. And so last night, you start to see people like Drew Brees and JJ Watt. They've figured this out. They're listening now. They're like, it is not about the military. It's never been about the military. But anyway, last night I saw somebody post a long post on Facebook about, please don't kneel during the flag. It's disrespectful to the military. And then there was this long story about the military. And I got so annoyed with this that I put this long comment up, and it was basically, I'm sick and tired of people using the military for political reasons. The military doesn't want to have anything to do with this. This is other people pulling the military in and using them, and it's gross. In my opinion. The reason I'm bringing this up, though, Doctor, is because I was really aggressive in the post, and I thought about it, and 10 minutes later I messaged the person I had commented and said, look, I was too aggressive, and I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. And one of the things that I think I've realized as I grow older is the approach I took, basically saying, you're a jackass, will never convince anybody of anything, right? And so we've got to be more mindful of this. But on the flip side, even somebody in my situation who, I like to think that I have one of the richest cultural experiences you could possibly have, given my background. Even I am learning things that I never knew. For instance, a friend of mine who is a 6 foot, 250-pound Black guy, used to play football. He characterizes himself as a pit bull. He put something up on one of my posts the other day that said, man, I got a plan when I go out at night. I got to be careful if I'm at the park. I can't have a bad day. I can't get angry in public. And I was like, man,
Yeah.
wow, that I didn't think about that fact. So that
Right.
when you talk about empathy, I think it's important for people, even people that feel like they understand what other people are going through, to be open-minded enough to be able to learn, hey, maybe you don't know everything that people are going through, right? And so talk about that a little bit, if you don't mind. Like, how do you learn? What's the best way to learn and empathize with what other people are going through, whether you're Black, white, or any other race, or anything like that?
Right. I think it really comes down to choosing to educate yourself. We make a lot of excuses as we don't know. That's the way I was raised. That's all I've been exposed to. But I'm pretty sure you didn't know exactly where your seats were going to be at the next concert, but you did some research and you found out. Right.
Yeah.
So that's what frustrates me as well, from a clinician. And yes, I'm a clinician, but I'm a Black woman first, right?
Yeah.
And so what causes me some pause is when folk don't understand that it's up to them to take power in their own purpose and to take charge of the message that not only they perpetuate, but also the message that they create from themselves. And so educating yourself on disparities, meaning, buy some books, follow some folk that are living in that lifestyle that you don't understand in order for you to maintain. It's funny because when we have, I'm a professor too at St. Petersburg College. And when I am teaching my students about diversity and I'm educating them, and specifically my students that are getting ready to travel overseas, when we could travel to do study abroad, they had to study the culture that they were getting ready to immerse themselves in.
They should.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is the point.
Yeah.
If you want to be a part of assisting, helping, bringing about change, awareness to any type of culture that's being treated, in a negative light, whether it's LGBTQ, whether it's women, whether it's Muslims, whether it's African Americans, whomever it is, you got to educate yourselves on their culture. You have to educate yourselves on what they're experiencing. The other piece is that you can't be afraid to recognize that you are ignorant in that area. I am ignorant in the ways of calculus. I have no problem.
I could teach you a little calculus. I have an engineering degree.
Help me.
Anytime you want.
Yeah, but it's like,
But you got to teach me a little clinical psychology. And
there a trade-off. We would have an even trade, but it's like, I have this PhD in psychology. That's my area. I don't know every single area about everything. So it's humbling ourselves to know that we need to ask that group, how, what is it that I can do to impact you? How do I change? This is the other piece. I think we have to really recognize the stereotypes and the biases, as I stated before, that we hold, but we also have to decide what type of message we want to send out to the world. No matter how upset you are, no matter how enraged you are, and trust me, I have those moments all the time when I'm looking across different feeds, I have to still decide the type of person that I want to represent, because folks are going to look at me as being a representation of African American PhD clinicians.
For sure.
Whether I want them to or not.
Yeah, that's going to happen no matter what. Yeah.
It's going to happen. So I've got to make sure that my message is one that holds a level of responsibility and accountability for others that are in my same field. You would have to do the same thing. So I think it's about not just allowing the action to activate us, right? And us being just quickly to react, but being proactive. And proactivity is when you pause from that comment and that statement, you think about the platform and the position that you're in, whether you work for the city, whether you work at a gas station, whether you work at Discount Auto Parts, it doesn't matter. There are people that work at Discount Auto Parts. There's people that work at gas stations. There's people that work in these areas that are looking for some guidance and some understanding. So we all have that responsibility to make sure that we're clear and that we're not behaving and responding in a way that represents what we're fighting against. Harder to do, harder, easy to say.
A lot harder, for sure.
A lot harder. So let's say you can't. Let's just say you're pissed, right? And you just don't know any kind of way other than to say what you need to say. Now, I am not innocent of being of never being pissed off. But I mean, honestly, I gotta be stereotypical. I totally journal. I totally have a place that I spew all the stuff that pisses me off. Yeah. It's a space for me to be able to transparent. And when I don't have that journal, I have a person who I know understands me in and out and who's okay with me yelling the things that I want to yell, with me using the profane language that I sometimes need to use to get my point across, from me crying because I don't understand, from me being angry, from me being afraid. We have to have safe spaces that we allow ourselves to get that out, because only then can we get all that frustration and anger, right? Because we got free will. But then after we work through that, then we're able to process our thoughts a little bit easier because it's not being clouded by all the aggression. Yeah. You have to have a healthy place to put your anger to. You have to have a sounding board to disclose that, because then once we do that, we're able to think more calmly. It's like that angry email you want to send out to someone, right? You'll type it up, be like, well, first of all, and you'll go through this whole category of reading this person there, right?
You know what's so weird too, Doctor? Let me tell you what's so bizarre. I find this so strange and also interesting at the same time. So there's people on Facebook and social media that I know personally that are fantastic people. On social media, you would think they were insane. Like, I know these people personally. I know they're nice folks. And I know this one guy who donated a kidney to a stranger. But if you looked at his Facebook page, you would think he was certifiably insane. And so this disconnect, between what we see online and what we see when we're talking face to face, like you and I are right now, is just amazing. But you talk about empathy a little bit, and I think that's really important. So let's talk about George Floyd, for instance. George Floyd was 6'7", muscular, strong, intimidating looking black guy. He had to behave in ways that, frankly, I or you don't have to behave, because people are naturally intimidated by him. And I keep hearing this stuff about, well, he had a criminal record and this and that. Why don't we ever ask the next question, which is, oh yeah, what did he do? Well, it turns out that he got a felony for some low-level drug offense that somebody in my neighborhood would get deferred adjudication for. And so if you want to call him a criminal, fine, but you better do your homework and figure out where that came from, because the path that he was put on early in his life is just not the same path that one of my kids would be put on if they were in the exact same situation. And that's what I think people, and that's not to criticize or say anything bad about anybody. That is just
it's a fact.
It's a fact. Yeah, it's just a fact. And until we realize that those facts are out there, then I mean, like, to me, the first step is realizing this is the fact. These are the facts. Now, what are we going to do about it? Right? Yeah. I mean, it's not like we can shrink George Floyd to be 6 foot and make him less intimidating, right? But we can certainly understand that big people like him, particularly big black men like him, don't get treated the same as the rest of us. It's just that simple. They just don't.
Right. If you were to take, let's just remove the criminality of it all, right? Let's just remove that, because that's not the case in a large majority of our Black men that have been, killed in
Yeah.
these streets. Many
Yeah.
of them don't have records at
Yeah.
all.
And
They're,
I want to
they're
make
not
sure,
records.
and flag that. I don't want to interrupt you, but there's something really important about that I want to talk about. So go ahead though. Go ahead.
Okay. And so my thing is, when we look at, if you look at a 6'7" white guy, think about, this is how I tell people if you want to recognize some of these ways to check yourself, that 6'7" Black guy should not automatically come with intimidation.
Yeah.
And then that intimidation is based on what? This is what I'm asking each person to ask themselves. When you look at this tall Black guy, why do they intimidate you? Do they intimidate you from an actual experience that you've had? Do they intimidate you from a comment that he or she has made to you? No, they're silent. You're just looking at them. So what is it? It's the stereotype. Because if I was to take that George Floyd character and put in that character a Mark, Rick, or Steve, you would not feel the same intimidation that you feel from George Floyd. So that is that recognition of the bias, right? The stereotype, the microaggressions that are already there, because they're causing us to set a vantage point of judge, and intimidation doesn't even exist. So yes, we have to understand that.
And the thing, and I've been thinking about this quite a bit lately too, the thing about that is I'm not intimidated by, but I see a big Black guy. I'm like, I've been banging against these guys for my entire life playing basketball. I've had a blast. I feel no intimidation at all. But guess what?
Yeah.
I've had a little bit of an advantage in the way I grew up over some other folks. So the other folks that haven't had the experiences that I have probably aren't going to feel quite the same way. And so a big part of, I think, our job as it relates to all this stuff is education. Just educating people about things that they just know nothing about.
Yes, continuing to have education, and continuing for the education to come from people, honestly, that also look just like them. That's the piece as well. It is, when you think about effective change in our country, right? Just a historical perspective. In order for change to take place with any organization or any group of or population marching or protesting, they've considered the opposition to have their backs in that march. Women, for our writing votes and equality, needed men to speak up for our rights to vote. Black people need white people and all others to stick up for the inequalities and the social disparities that are happening.
A friend of mine told me, Doctor, not to interrupt you, but a friend of mine told me, I thought this was a great quote. He said, injustice will not be prevented until the people that are not affected by it are as offended as the people that are affected by it.
Right. And that's when it really boils down to, particularly you, for instance, using your voice in front of your peers specifically is going to go across much differently than me using my voice or my husband using his voice.
That's right.
And so we have to understand those powers that we have just from in our own cultures of how to educate. I think the other piece with that education is then once we start that conversation, living the conversation. You just can't have the conversation and put out a tweet or a meme. I'm so over that, or a hashtag.
Tears and prayers. Yeah, tears and prayers. All right, great. Tears and prayers.
Right.
Now let's get some action and actually get something done. But you
said
something earlier. You said something earlier that I think is really important, because there's been some talk about this statistic that white people actually get killed by cops at a greater rate than Black people. And I've heard this from people that I actually really respect, people that are you would normally think would have some different views on that. And it frustrates me because of what you said, because it's not just the number of people that have been killed. It is also how many of these folks were innocent. How many of these folks got killed as a result of a traffic ticket? I mean, just last night, Doctor, or 2 nights ago, a Black man was shot in the back 3 times running away. But the thing about that's so crazy to me is he was passed out drunk in a parking lot in his car. Why don't we just go and call him a taxi? Hey, can I help you out, man? Hey, I'm going to grab your keys. We're going to have them at the station. We're going to call you an Uber, and we're going to make sure you get home all right. Like this mentality that it's a confrontation is just nuts. I mean, what are we doing here? I mean, how many Black men have been killed as a result of having a busted taillight? That's a question we really need to be. And it's not
Right.
just the shootings. It's the just the mistreatment in general, the
Yes.
suspicion, all that sort of thing. That's not captured in the statistics. But if you know anything at all about the experience of the Black community, then you know that it's just the treatment is different. I live in a very wealthy neighborhood in Houston. I have never been harassed by the police ever, and I don't know a single person in my neighborhood who's been harassed. Literally not a single person. By contrast, I was talking to a buddy of mine who's a sports professional in China, and he knows 25 NBA or professional basketball players. He said 100% of them
Yeah.
had an experience. So, and
I've had an experience. Yeah.
I'm sure you have. I'm sure you have. And you know what?
Yeah.
I haven't. I've been pulled over by the cops. I've never felt like I was being mistreated because I had blonde hair or, I was tall or anything like that. And so, and this is not to say, by the way, and I think some people, when they hear this stuff, think that we're fussing at them or we're saying they're bad people or we're pointing our finger at. We're not. I don't think, at least I'm not. All I'm trying to say is we have to recognize factually that there are differences in the way people are treated. That's it.
Yes. And I often lead with this when I'm talking to people about these areas, never to offend, always to educate.
Yeah.
Because that is exactly what we need. We need to be educated. We need to be educated on the fact that, yes, I hear your stats, right, about more white people, versus Black. But when we look at the population in whole, the numbers of white Americans versus the numbers of Black Americans, and then the numbers of Black Americans being smaller, but then that number being disparagingly huge of those that are mass incarcerated, treated differently, killed on the streets. You just cannot compare.
It's just not even, it's not even the same universe. I mean, it's just not. Yeah.
Right. And so again, this kind of comes down to that point of what we're saying is not that these things don't happen in other areas. What we're saying is that there is a major area of disconnect when it comes to the frequency of these disparities happening to brown and Black individuals.
Yeah.
That is what we're saying. And the only way to bring about that effective change is for conversations like this, for those of us to be active in our own communities. I'm not saying that you have to go out and protest, because you got to be safe. You still got a virus going on.
For sure.
I'm not saying that you want to get involved in the political realm.
And I don't have to, you're not saying, Brian Beckcom, you got to go move to the 5th Ward in Houston and live with a bunch of Black people for the next 5 years. We're not even saying that.
Right.
Or vice versa. Hey, Dr. East, you got to come move into my neighborhood for 5 years. All we're saying is we got to recognize that we've got a community that gets treated in ways that are different from other communities, in ways that are not fair. And we need to empathize with people. And I will say this, Dr. East, I've been very happy to see when you see an 85-year-old white guy by himself on the corner with a Black Lives Matter billboard, or when you see Mitt Romney walking, or when you see groups of people that you would have never expected to stand up and support this movement, support it. I think that shows that not only that there's hope, but that we have a lot more good folks in this country than we do bad folks.
I agree. I think that that's that positivity of reframing things and not just always focusing on what is not happening, but focuses on the things that are happening and the mindsets that are evolving, and giving people time to evolve. Remember, folk are really being educated right now on this thing, and they're figuring it out. And so instead of us screaming and saying, well, you haven't stated your position, do something about it. Educate them so that they can state their position. But then the other piece of that is to also, if we are to have any effective change as a people, we have to forgive the ignorances of fools. And we have to learn we have to allow people to make amends who make mistakes. We allow people who get the statement wrong to come back and get the statement right.
100% agree. 100% agree. Like, we have to forgive people that make mistakes that are legitimately trying to learn. I mean, this notion that if you say something wrong, you're done forever is preposterous. And the people that do this are just as big a fascist as the fascists themselves. You got to give people a chance to atone if they're honest about it. I mean, there are literally murderers that we have forgiven over people that have just made bad comments on social media and have apologized for it. I mean, this is kind of upside down. Well, Doctor, we've been going for an hour. Do you have another 15 minutes or so?
Sure.
Okay. So, and I wanted to talk about your book. I read your book yesterday. Great book. It's called The Hangover. And then the subtitle is Overcoming Emotional Addiction, 12 Steps to Emotional Sobriety. Everybody, The Hangover, Overcoming Addiction, 12 Steps for Emotional Sobriety. Dr. Carleah East. That's on Amazon. You can get it. Matter of fact, I don't know if you know this, Doctor, but if you're a Prime member, you can do the book trade and just get it for free. I think they still pay the author, but I got it for free.
Look at that.
Yeah. But great book. And you know, I made some notes on the book. First of all, I got to ask you this question. Okay. Where'd you get the nickname Sapphire Woman? I saw Sapphire Woman. Where does that come from?
Yes, actually, I have an organization called the Sapphire Woman Organization, and we are geared towards helping women of all socioeconomic backgrounds and sexualities to kind of find their hope, healing, and happiness. That's what we focus on. And I am a proud member of Zeta Phi Beta sorority, which the color is royal blue.
Nice.
And so when I thought about the color royal blue and the stone sapphire, which I've always loved, I thought about the fact that it stood for royalty, but blue also stands for healing and peace and, renewal, right? And those are things and truth. And those are things that I think women all should embrace and embody no matter their walks of life. And so in order for me to have women become sapphire women, I got to be her myself. And so that's where that came from.
I love it. Well, the book is great. And the book,
thank you.
I think it's fair. And tell me if I'm characterizing it correctly. It's basically like a map or a route about how to, first of all, define emotional addiction. Second of all, how you recognize the different signs of it. And then third of all, you got a bunch of great suggestions about how to overcome emotional addiction. But I made some notes, and there's no way I'd have to get you on another podcast to be able to talk about everything I want to talk about with the book. But you talk about a couple things I made some notes on that I want to make sure and touch on real quick. So first of all, when we talk about emotional addiction, you define emotional addiction as basically being addicted to the emotional highs and lows of the relationship. And I think actually we could take that outside of the context of what you're talking about in the book and see some people are addicted to the emotional highs and lows of the internet and social media and stuff right now. Absolutely. Right. And so that rage and anger and all that stuff becomes somewhat addictive. But you talk about, and I, by the way, I love this kind of thing a lot. You talk about journaling, you talk about mantras, you talk about surrounding yourself with positive people, you talk about triggers, you talk about recognizing mental patterns, and I want to hit those just real quick. So tell us a little bit about mantras, what they are, kind of how they fit into the book and your way of seeing the world.
Okay. Mantras in general are just positive affirmations, that we can Google or create yourself. Specifically for my book, The Hangover, I use it as an exercise. That's one of the things I love about the book because it really is a guide. And each chapter gives you a free therapeutic exercise, to engage in, to explore.
It's awesome.
So the mantra,
it's very straightforward. I mean, you lay it out so straightforward. I love the way you lay it out. It's a very useful book, is the way I would put it.
Yes, and I like that it has a very evergreen approach. So no matter what you're going through, that at any moment you can pick that up. But the mantra is really about you recognizing the things about you that you don't like, because those are the easiest for us to pull out, right? We're constantly berating ourselves and judging ourselves and feeling guilty about stuff. So at first you point out everything you don't like. You know, my head's too big, I got cellulite, you know, muscles not big enough, I don't make enough money, whatever. The point of it is for you to counteract that with something positive. You know, so, you know, maybe I have cellulite because I've brought three wonderful kids into the world, and they're amazing individuals.
Have you been
Boom.
talking to my wife?
Nah, I know. Exactly. But it's just about really
She's
finding
right.
it's the truth. It's about finding those things that we normally would see as a downfall or a weakness, and finding the strength. Like, for instance, you know, I have dark circles under my eyes. You know, am I going to complain about them? Am I going to realize these dark circles represent hard work and dedication? So it's reframing the negatives, making that a positive, and then saying that to yourself every day that you get up, instead of saying what we often say, I didn't get this done, you know, here's another day, you know, being agitated. So the mantra is really about surrounding yourself with positive energy about yourself. Because if you are investing in you and making you positive, then it sets you up to be able to combat the negativity that you're going to face regardless from people that aren't where you are yet.
I absolutely love that. And it's important too, I think, and you say this in the book, to actually write them down, like to actually put them down on paper, like write down your mantra. There's something about the connection from your hand to your brain that really kind of solidifies, you know, those kind of thought processes. So that's a good segue, I think, to talk about journaling. So I've journaled for 25 years. I journal basically every day. It's one of the best things I've ever done in terms of just being able to get stuff out of my head.
Right.
Like these mental loops we get into, or like when I'm having some negative mental states, just throwing that stuff down on paper. It's amazing how therapeutic that can be. So tell us a little bit about your experience and your thoughts on journaling.
You know, I was asked one time in an interview, there's a book that you could recommend to someone. What book would you recommend? And I said, a journal. And they said, who was the author of that? And I'm like, you.
Nice, nice.
Duh, you know?
Yeah.
But a journal really is a safe space. And that's what I want to, those two words, it's a safe space. Many times, even if we're talking to our loved ones, they may not understand exactly the angst and the turmoil and the frustrations that we're going through, because they haven't necessarily lived our lives in color and had the experiences that we've had. Even though we're married to them, they may not get it. And so your journal is a safe space for you to put your thoughts, no matter how politically incorrect they are, no matter the fact that you can't tweet it or type it. It's an area for you to express some of that aggression that we all have, that free will that we all have, and then for you to tackle it in your own time, instead of someone putting a timer or a deciding factor on when you're supposed to work through or when you're supposed to process things. The other thing that journaling does is it clears space for you to process and think clearly on the things that are the most important.
Great point.
You know?
Yeah.
Sometimes we get things in our head and we vacillate. And vacillating means we think about them over and over, like a repetition, over and over and over again. And so it interrupts our sleep. It causes us to be easily frustrated with folks. Our temperament is a little bit less calmer. So when you're able to take that piece of it and put that on a sheet of paper, even if it's before bed, put that list of to-do things on a nightstand so that you can have peace at night, so that you can remove that negativity, so that your brain can have what it needs to have the space that it needs to operate fully, then you do that. And the really cool thing about the journal is it shows your progress or the areas that you need to do a little bit more work in, because you're able to go back and read your own words of what you were frustrated about, or your own words of the things that you wanted to conquer, and kind of check yourself, right? Do a self-check of, I have conquered this, I'm a lot better at this, or I still do this behavior, let me work on that. So it's really your own, you know, manifestation of the truth of who you are, where you're trying to be, and the steps to get there. And it's personal and only for your eyes. And that's a very safe place to be in.
And there's no rules. You don't have to write a certain thing. You don't have to write a certain number of words. It's not like that at all, but it really is. And you know, the next thing I was going to talk about is these patterns in your mind. And it's amazing to me, Doctor, how mantras, journaling, mental patterns, how they're connected. They're all so connected.
Yeah.
So one of the things I find when I journal is I'll start going, man, I got a mental pattern going over this particular subject. I need to figure out how to break this pattern. You know what I mean? And so that again is the perfect. So we talked about mantras, we talked about journaling. Talk little bit about mental patterns, how
Mm-hmm.
people, so what I didn't know until I started meditating about 10 years ago, I didn't even know I had mental patterns, to be honest with you.
Right.
Right? I didn't even know they existed.
Yeah.
Right? I just thought I was, my brain just worked the way it worked and
Where it
everything,
works. Yeah.
and that was it. And when I started meditating, and all I mean by that is when I started looking at my thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
I realized that basically all of my thoughts were some sort of mental pattern. And so,
Yes. Yes.
what do you recommend for people, first of all,
Mm-hmm.
to recognize their mental patterns, and then number two, if they want to do something about those patterns, how would you
Okay.
suggest they go about that?
So, in recognizing the mental patterns, we got to go back to what we just talked about. Journaling is going to be super awesome for that because you're writing what you're thinking,
Yeah,
right? And so, when you're able to go back and look at, week 1, week 2, and this theme is coming up in your writings, then that's an area that needs a little bit more attention. If you're not writing and you just find yourself coming back to the same thought process, that's when you know there's something that you need to address. Number one is when you can't kick it, when you can't
yeah,
shake it, when
yeah.
it constantly pops up in things that's not even relevant for it to pop up in. Like if you're at the grocery store looking for Fruit Loops and all of a sudden this thing, pops in your head and you're like, I just want some Fruit
I'm
Loops.
so pissed at Sheila.
Right.
Where are the Fruit Loops?
Where are the Fruit Loops?
You're like, where did that come from?
You're all mad in aisle
Yeah.
7, you
Banging on the
we got to
box of
work on
Fruit
that.
Loops. I hate that woman.
And that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
It's being able to see yourself coming back to a similar thought process. So to answer the question of recognizing, it's either seeing the patterns in your writing or recognizing that you're still upset about this, that you're still talking about it. The other piece about that is the mindfulness and understanding your patterns. Once you realize that you are still upset about something, that it still triggers you, meaning it has an emotional pull. That's what a trigger is, by the way. A trigger is something, whether sight, touch, taste, smell, or sound, that pulls us emotionally. So it can be a song, it can be the taste of a food, it can be the sound, whatever it
The
is.
smell.
It pulls
The
the
smell.
smell, right? A
Yeah.
touch in the wrong place, can
Yeah.
trigger us in different types of ways.
Yeah.
And so it's about you being mindful of how you're being pushed and pulled, how your senses are being impacted. Mindfulness is about thinking more deeply about what you're hearing in your senses. So when you're mindful, it's about me taking stock in what am I hearing right now? What am I tasting right now? What am I smelling? What am I feeling? What am I thinking? Why am I thinking that way? It's really dissecting your thought at that moment. That allows us to see patterns in the way that we think. That allows us to say, you know what? I'm upset. I'm angry. Why am I angry? Okay, because my little boy spilled milk on carpet. But is that really why
Is that
I'm
really
angry?
it? Yeah. Yeah.
Is that really it? Am I
Yeah.
really upset that my 5-year-old made a 5-year-old boo-boo? Made a 5-year-old accident?
Yeah.
Or am I upset about something else that is now being directed and bleeding into this? So that's what being mindful is. The more mindful you are, the more you check yourself and ask yourself those questions, then the more powerful you become because you're more aware of how your brain processes information. And then once you realize that this is something that causes me to get irritated immediately, or every time Joan walks into the office, I'm just like, here she go. If those are things that you notice patterns in, then that's the area that you need to focus on effective coping strategies. And coping strategies are, simply put, you putting things in place that allow you to still be your best self, even though your triggers are present.
Yeah.
That's what those are for. So yeah, it's really about being more mindful, understanding how you feel, recognizing those patterns, and then questioning why exactly you're still feeling that way.
Mark Twain has a great quote. He said, I am an old man and have known, and I'm paraphrasing, but this, you'll get the point. I'm an old man and have known many sorrows, most of which never happened.
Right.
And he's trying to illustrate the point. And so for me, like I injured my wrist a couple summers ago. And this is not a huge deal, but I think it's real illustrative of the way your mental patterns work. So I hurt my wrist and I was scheduled to play in a golf tournament with a good friend of mine that I've been playing in for 5 years. It's kind of the highlight of my summer. I always look forward to this.
Right.
And he's a really, really close friend. His wife comes up to Colorado. My wife, we all love each other and we have a great time. And so I hurt my wrist and it hurt, like painfully, physically, it hurt. But then I started telling myself a story in my head. And the story went something like this. What am I going to do if it doesn't get better in a month? What if it's worse than I think? What if I have arthritis and it's always going to hurt for the rest of my, and I start, and you're
All
laughing at me
negative.
because I know you
Nothing
probably hear
positive.
this all the time, right? And so I was like, whoa, this is a difference between pain, which is just whatever the physical sensations you're feeling, and suffering. Like I was basically causing my
more
own
pain
suffering.
in your
Yes.
wrist. Yep. By the way you were thinking.
Yes. And so there's these patterns and these triggers that you're talking about that I mean, the difference between having a wrist injury that gets better in a month and having a wrist injury that you mentally torture yourself about for 3 weeks is massive, right?
Yes. Yes.
Well,
our body responds to the way that we think. Our brain is our motherboard of our body. You know, when you hear things about you can stress yourself into an early grave. Yeah, stress is about thinking, and our bodies don't recognize good versus bad stress. It just knows that we're stressed. We could be stressed because we're getting married and we just got a promotion and we're so excited and happy that we worked for, or we could be stressed because we're getting a divorce and we're getting demoted, you know, so our body doesn't know. But what we do know is that when we produce negative thoughts, that causes negative toxins to attack our bodies. Those toxins attack our white blood cells, which are there to what? Fight off infection, disease, things of that nature. So if you've ever noticed it this way, think about when you've been really taxed about something, when you've been really upset about something or grieving something. You ever notice you get headaches, stomach aches, you know, you get tingling sensations, you know, those things don't operate the same. You get heart palpitations, they don't operate the same because your mind is flustered. So the more that we can keep our mind healthy by making sure we're getting our omega-3s and our vitamins and our nutrients and talk about things that we're experiencing. If we don't want to talk, write them out. The more that we do that, the more that we are providing our brain a space for it to let go of those toxins, for it to release that negativity, and for it to restore and renew so that it can operate the way we need it to operate.
Awesome. And then the last thing, and again, we could talk about, because I mean, basically every single sentence in your book is something I'm interested in. We could talk about it for a long time.
Yeah, have me back on for sure.
I will. Yeah, no, definitely. But there's one more thing I want to talk about is you say surround yourself with positive people, and what that really, the reason I wrote that down is because I've read and been preaching to people for quite some time that there's tons of evidence that essentially shows that you will basically end up in the same physical and mental shape as the 5 or 6 people you spend the most time with. And so the important point of those studies and that stuff is it's not just taking care of yourself, but you need to be real careful about who you spend your time with, because that has a way bigger influence than maybe a lot of us realize. So talk about that a little bit, Dr. East, because right now, you know, it's kind of bizarre. We can, if we want to, we can go on Twitter or Facebook or social media and be completely surrounded by millions of negative people instantly. Right. We have that option. And some people choose that option. But anyway, talk a little bit more about what you mean when you say, as a practical matter, surround yourself with positive people.
So I'm going to use a couple metaphors because I think metaphors are great and kind of paint a picture for folk. So number one, I want everybody to go into their Harry Potter land. Okay, everybody can put your Harry Potter hats on, right?
I'm there.
Done. Stupefied. So when and so when you think about the Dementors, right, in Harry Potter, the main thing that they did was they came up and they sucked, right, the essence, the energy that made Harry have life, right? They sucked the essence of life out of them. When you are surrounding yourself with people that are not on the same page as you, and I'm going to say equally yoked, which is not about financial strengths and gains, it's about emotional and mental levels, right? Being on the same page emotionally and mentally. When you are not equally yoked emotionally and mentally with someone, one or the other of you is going to pull off of the other person. So if you're the strong one, that weaker individual is going to pull for you. Now, I'm not stating that it's not okay to have that, because there has to be an ebb and flow with relationships. I have girlfriends and guy friends that are much stronger in other areas than I am. So there's an ebb and flow of me pulling off of them and me pulling off of them, and them pulling off of me, and that's fine. What I'm speaking about is the folks that only follow. They float behind, they follow, and they absorb all of your energy, and you're there trying to carry them along to where it becomes your issue and you're exhausted by it. So That's the first thing we need to recognize is those folks. Those are the people that you call and you want to voice an opinion about something you're experiencing, and the conversation ends up being about them. Those are also the people that you express a certain thing that happened to you, and you know what? It happened to them too, but it was way worse. So those are the things that you have to think about. The other metaphor or picture that I want to paint for you is the planet Saturn, right? Saturn has 7 rings around it. I want you to think about those 7 rings as being 7 people in your life, okay, that are, there for you. And I love number 7 just because it has a biblical, very strong spiritual meaning to it, and a very protective meaning to it orally. I'm sorry, not orally, but when you're looking at vibes, right? Your vibrations and your auras, right?
Yeah.
So 7 is a great number, but when you look at Saturn, you're the planet in the middle, and Saturn needs all those rings around it in order for it to stay in rotation, right? That's how it stays afloat. It's all those rings have to kind of balance and move as they flow. Think about the people in your life. If I were to ask you to create you as the planet and the 7 rings around you, who would you put there?
Yeah.
So first of all, do that. And then tell me this, those people that are there, how many of them are going to answer the call when you call if you need something? Not necessarily a financial thing, but emotional support. How many of them can you really share who you are transparently? How many of them are there because they've been there and been your friends for years, but you really don't talk a whole lot. They really don't know exactly what's going on with you now, but y'all been ride or die for 20 years. Again, it's about looking at where those people are in your life and not dismissing them. No. You're not dismissing them. You are meeting them with expectations that are fair. So if I have a girlfriend and she and I are in different planes, right, of being equally yoked, I'm thinking differently than she is. I'm not going to stop being her friend. I'm going to adjust my expectations for that friendship so that I can meet her where she is and she can meet me where I am, and we don't disappoint each other in those expectations. So I think we really have to take stock around the 7 rings that are keeping us in orbit and make sure that those are individuals that are positive, that it's an ebb and flow of give and take, and that we are both equally yoked in reaching for the same goals and missions.
Here's a potential. I love the way you put that. Here's a potential test for that. Because when you were talking about that, it made me think of a couple friend that my wife and I have that we own. We own a little small vacation type house, and we spend 4 or 5 weekends in the fall together. And I'm thinking about the fact that every time we do that, when we're done with the weekend, my wife and I always have smiles on our face. We feel good. Even if we drank a little bit too much and ate a little bit too much, we feel refreshed. Like spending the weekend with this particular couple gives us a feeling of just feeling like emotionally and physically refreshed and happy. Whereas I'm thinking of another guy that I know that, man, I kind of don't want to play golf with him anymore because all he does is bitch and complain about everything. I'm like, golly, you're so negative all the time. Like, break out of it. And so maybe a good test would be in terms of the 7 rings that are around you, how you feel. Because I know that Dr. East, everybody listening, and you too probably has that experience where you, man, golly, I just talked to this person for 30 minutes and I'm totally drained.
Feel completely okay to put those individuals that require more energy than others on a schedule. I'm being so serious. Like, be okay to say, you know what? I know he or she is going to require a little bit more energy, going to require a little bit more conversation. Let me wait until Friday to call them. Let them know, listen, let's get together when I can have a glass of wine and some backup, to have this conversation. I think that we have to feel okay about setting interpersonal boundaries for ourselves. And even though we are socially quarantined,
Oh no, did I lose you? Are you still there, doctor?
primarily communicating, that can in our environment. We have to be strategic in the way that we interact with others and how we bring people into our lives. And sometimes that means save them for Saturday. Save them for a day that you have the energy and you don't mind. But we have to allow ourselves to give we have to give ourselves the permission to do so.
Well, great advice. Well, Doctor, the people that are listening didn't hear our little conversation beforehand where I told you that it would take a little less than an hour, maybe an hour, and we're already at an hour and a half. And you're in very, very big demand. It's not often that I get a chance to talk to a PhD clinical psychologist / therapist for an hour and a half about these topics. I don't want to keep you any longer because you're already half an hour over the time that you committed. I do want to really honestly and sincerely say I appreciate your time because I know you're very, very busy and
Thank you.
Your time is very, very valuable. But before I let you go, Doc, tell people where they can find you online and if they wanted to learn a little bit more about you, where you would suggest they go.
Okay. Well, you can reach out to me. My website is www.smilepsychology, just as it sounds, .com. There, I have a team of professionals that I work with where we provide services. And so, even if you're looking for therapists and maybe I'm not the one, and that's okay, I've got a squad of people that can assist you. And we all follow the same holistic way of treating and providing, therapy. You can also check me out on my Facebook page. My handle is at Dr. East LLC, or you can just call and speak to our support staff at 727-569-6305. But if you ever just want to reach out and you want me to come out and speak, let's say it's not therapy, that you want me to come out and educate and do some trainings or do some webinars or whatever it is, you can reach out to me, info@smilepsychology.com. And exactly as it sounds, info@smilepsychology.com.
Perfect. So smilepsychology.com as the website,
yes.
info@smilepsychology.com is the email address. Well, again, Doctor, thank you very, very, very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for your beautiful smile. Thank you for everything you're doing during these times and even just kind of during normal times. And
yeah, thank you so much for having me and for allowing my voice to be heard. I think that people have stereotypes when they think about therapists in general, and they think we're all Freud, and we're not. But hopefully this adds a little bit of a color to the way we see therapy and a little bit more acceptance in ourselves of the work that we need to do. So thank you so much for allowing me to share my expertise on this platform.
You got it. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Lessons from Leaders with Brian Beckcom. If you've enjoyed this week's interview, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast and keep up with the latest episodes. You can also connect with Brian through his firm at vbattorneys.com.